Alright, get ready. It's time for the ITGS Chapter 13 quiz video. Chapter 13 is titled Leisure. As with every other video in this series of quiz videos, the questions come first, the answers come later, so it's best you write down your answers so you can compare them. It's practice in every way, so it's good to try. So, let's get into it. You're going to want to have your book, if you have access to it, you're going to want to have the book open when you're looking at this video. One of the questions does involve you referring back to the text. Okay, the first question. Question 1, Part A. Define the term intellectual property. Describe 2 technologies which have assisted in the illegal online copying of files. Question 1, Part B. Explain the considerations film companies need to make when deciding to distribute their products online. Part C. Discuss methods governments can use to combat illegal distribution of copyright material online. Okay, question 2. Analyze the issue of online identities. Should users be required to use and prove their real identity before using online services such as virtual worlds and games? What are the risks and benefits? Evaluate your answer. Okay, question 3, and this is the one you're going to want to have your book open for. This question reads, to what extent can technical solutions solve the internet addiction problem experienced in South Korea? This question is found at the bottom of page 278 in the text. It's underneath a whole paragraph that goes through the entire story and problem of internet addiction in South Korea, so it's a good idea if you reread that before you try to answer this question. It's got a ton of information that can help you out. Nevertheless, the question is displayed above again. To what extent can technical solutions solve the internet addiction problem experienced in South Korea? Okay, a lot of stuff on the answers for the question 1, so we'll read through it one at a time. So Part A wanted a definition of intellectual property. Intellectual property is the created materials, usually of some art form, made available through media such as the internet. This question's going to go into. This could include films. This could include artwork, photography. Just any form of like digital media that people would have some desire to copy, and that would lead them, to violating intellectual property. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but it's usually like it's creations of the mind by definition. In ITGS, that's what intellectual property is defined as: creations of the mind that basically are just made available through the internet. And so, the second part of question A wanted some technologies that can aid in the illegal copying of intellectual property. Photocopiers and file conversion softwares are just 2 examples of an ever-long list and growing list of technologies that can aid in the copying and illegal distribution of intellectual property. Intellectual property is under fire from all sides, and there are so many ways with which people and hackers can capture the media and then distribute it as their own. It's so much of a problem that any intellectual property you place on the internet, you do so at your own risk, because it's very, very vulnerable to this kind of stuff. And so Part B wanted to know, what considerations do film companies need to make? They need to consider the film's vulnerability, who their film will be available to, and who, if anyone amongst those people, would be willing and or able to steal it. And that kind of leads into the third part of this question, which wants to know, ways to solve illegal distribution of intellectual property. Digital policing in the form of federal regulation on encryptions and file security to such an extent that most software commonly available to computer users would not be able to steal the items. Government standards are for security in a lot of things. Government has, bare minimums that some things need to go through in order to be standardized, in order to be secure, but they really don't have much for stuff like intellectual property. So what if there were a federally regulated website or some way to encrypt files that might make them safer, that might not be as vulnerable to hackers and other computer users as our current intellectual property files of today? Answered question 2. Wanted the online identities, an evaluation of them. Some people may believe that forcing people to provide their identities online would stop things like online, stalking or other malicious deeds like trying to get people's information or hacking or whatever. But would it? In reality, people may even be more vulnerable if they are forced to identify themselves, because the information with which they do so would be vulnerable. Alrighty. Answer to question 3. Technical methods might be able to place automated restrictions on online game playing. South Korea, the internet addiction problems are really bad. The internet addiction problems are really, it's bad. It's really bad. In fact, if you went back and you read that passage, some of those numbers are pretty scary. So technical methods might be able to place automated restrictions on online game playing. Some game systems and virtual worlds are set to automatically shut down after being used a certain amount of time. This is a good way to, I guess, convince users to stop using it. It's really tough if people want to use the games for that long. Bad for them as it may be, it's tough to stop them. And so with that said, you can only fight fire with fire for so much before you get burned. Technical methods in this case are trying to solve a technical problem, people being addicted to technology. So